Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of 3 Minutes of Motivation. My name is Turin the Beak, and we have a great guest today. His name is Kyle Mapley, and he runs a consultancy called Potential in Action, which is all about helping people reach their highest potential. So I'm really excited to have him on the show because he's going to be able to share some insights and, of course, uplift us with some inspiration and motivation. So, really happy to have you here, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks, Tyrion, for the introduction there. I'm really glad to be here.
Amazing, amazing. So me and Carl's already spoken about a lot of things around motivation, inspiration, and one particular thing that we want to discuss on was about limitations because there's a lot of discussion around limitations, around on what we can do, and sometimes what kind of stops us is what we think we can't do because it's down to our belief system. So the main question I wanted to ask was what is the kind of the step by step process of first removing the limiting beliefs, and how do we get to a place where we start learning how to overcome these limitations?
Yeah, it's a really great question, man. In terms of the process, it all begins with awareness of yourself. And the reason for that is that you quite simply can't change what you're not aware of.
Mm,
And the reason why we have self limiting beliefs in the first place and why they're a useful tool for finding out where you are at the moment in your professional and personal development and where you're going is because they come from our past,
mm,
from our parents and difficult experiences and this kind of thing. And unconsciously, we have like these little things like I'm not good enough around people, or I'm not a very good speaker, for example, or I can't be an entrepreneur. There's all these different beliefs, and they come from the past. Now, so it all starts with raising your awareness. And what that means is, as a step, is you have to change your state to
mm.
be in a more comfortable one. So your state is a mixture of how you're emotionally and physically feeling. So physically, you could be feeling quite tight all day, and you might not even necessarily know that. You might feel tight around your chest area, and likewise mentally, you can have racing thoughts, a lot of judgment going on in your head, and so on. And those can also be good symbols
Yeah.
for knowing there's something to work on. So what you need to do first is you need to put yourself in a good state. You need to relax, do deep breathing, exercises like meditation, just to give off one example. And that gives you the perfect context for diving into your subconscious beliefs and asking
Mm,
yourself honest questions in a psychologically safe way. Things like, why do I feel this way? Why don't I feel good enough when I'm speaking in front of people? Or why
mm.
don't I feel good enough to be an entrepreneur? It's only when you're feeling safe within yourself and relaxed that you'll get those honest answers to raise awareness. So that's step number one. You need to raise your awareness, and to do that, you need to relax and soften up your state. Then the second thing is you need to map out where those beliefs come from. So now you're
Mm.
aware, and your mind is giving you different ideas and throwing them out to you, suggestions, vague callings from the past, or randomly some experience will pop into your head. And so you use this safe space you've created for yourself to explore those and to map out how you came to believe I'm not good enough for X, Y, or Z. And once you've figured out the cause and the nature of the cause, so for example, if someone doesn't feel good enough around people because they've been bullied in school, for example, they might trace back some previous events where they were humiliated and this kind of thing, and they still expect to be humiliated today. And what you get to do by linking your present up to the past is that you get to realize how you created that pattern.
Mm.
You now know that the context for that pattern is far away from the present now. You're not that
Yeah.
person anymore. You're not in that environment. People are more mature now in the case of like bullying and self-esteem, for example.
Yeah.
And so you can let go of that essentially and realize you're in that different context. And that kind of just triggers this switch in your mind. Just that understanding in itself, it frees you and it liberates you. The other useful tool it gives you then is that you can take action to start countering that belief. So
Mm,
around every belief, you've got like legs of evidence, you can call them, that
mm.
support that belief. And our beliefs are kind of causing that evidence to occur as well.
Yeah.
So once you've seen the pattern that you're in, like you're kind of like a hamster on a wheel, you now need to start jumping off of that wheel consciously.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Good analogy.
what you need to do is just build up counter evidence, then essentially, to this belief that you've realized you've built up. And so, yeah, by understanding where the belief came from and building up evidence against it, you can change any self limitation in that simple framework. So, in summary, it's raise your awareness by having a good state, explore the past, and then understand it and take action.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love all that. I think everything that you said is so true. And I think that the difficult part, which I believe that many people may have struggled with, and I'm just speaking from myself, was confronting the past in the first place. Because of course you have to go into, it's kind of like whole thing. I'm not too sure if you've read the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson.
I haven't seen that just yet.
So he
Heard it's
basically
great.
describes self-awareness almost like an onion that you're peeling. And it's kind of like the more layers you go, the more, you know, it kind of makes you cry, if that makes sense, because it's like layer upon layer. And it's a good analogy because it does help you in essence to see the core of what it is that might be stopping you. And then when you kind of figure out, oh, that's the belief, that's the thing that's kind of holding me back. You kind of go into the whole engineering, or where you have to rewire your brain to start seeing things a bit more differently in the present moment. And I love that whole hamster analogy as well, because it's so true. Because like it's literally almost like you're running around and you have to kind of take yourself out of that state to understand what's actually going on. Because the mind obviously races consistently, continuously. So it's a good analogy. Um, what would just touching more around the limitations then. So in terms of being your best self. So in a state where now you start to realize, okay, cool, these limitations are from my past. I can change these limitations in my present so I can become a better person. But now I'm seeing myself in the future and I want to become a better person in the future because I have these thoughts that I'm working with that are helping me to get there. What's your process, or like your way of thinking around being your best self?
Going into the future, that is. Um, that's a really great question there, Nate. What I would say is that you don't want to overthink it.
Yeah,
You're, it's a
it's a
bit of a
great answer.
difficult one because, yeah, the difficult thing is that, like you said, drawing on that onion analogy, you can peel off many layers and you'll still have many more to go. And the issue that is this, that when you're projecting out into into a future, like an ideal future,
Mm.
some of that is going to still be because of unconscious beliefs from the past.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and what you might find is that as you're on this journey, your final destination that you thought you had, your North Star, kind of keeps changing,
Mm.
because you're peeling back these onions in yourself. You're finding out more about what you do and don't like, and so on. So the answer to this question really varies by the individual.
Mm.
I would say that one shouldn't look too far into the future with regards to their personal development, unless they really do feel keenly set on a course. For example, you can undergo a lot of personal development starting a family. You can do it starting a business too.
Yeah.
If you're someone that already knows in your heart that you, for example, want to start a business and become an entrepreneur, and you'll gladly dedicate 5 to 10 years for that,
Yeah.
then do that by all means. But in the areas where you're not so sure, I would say keep it flexible, keep it open. It's probably best to keep diving into the past or being in the present to find out what you really want for the future. It's a very elusive question for most people, what their ideal future would be like. For a very common stereotypical one would be, you look forward to retirement, and many people do not thrive once they hit the retirement age.
Yeah.
And they're now in new sets of routines and they're not growing from life and enjoying it as much as they would have thought.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's really interesting, right? Because I think how um how life has kind of been put onto um the world is like you have to almost have this ideal plan. And the problem with that is, as you said, is like it always depends on the person, right? Like not every single person has to be successful running their own business. Not every single person has to be successful in every other ways. It's all tailored down to the person. And ironically as well, you can still be very successful whether you're a business owner or work within a business. You know what I'm trying to say? It's just all based around the
Yeah.
skill set and the mindset that you're applying to whatever you're doing. Which is like truly interesting around what you're saying. And I think the one thing you mentioned as well about overthinking, like that was down to the T, because a lot of overthinking is probably pressured on people based around social media. So for instance, a person's highlight at that moment of time, you know, if it seems like so out of reach of where you might be at that moment of time, and then it's playing this game of comparison of like ambition size to another ambition size, you start to realize, wait a minute, actually, that person may not be doing anything that I actually want to be doing. I might be want to be doing something completely different. It's just that in that moment at that time, I feel like as if my future's been altered because of that. So it's really good that you mentioned about going back into the present, or I scratch it, going back into the past to see certain things so you can connect the dots and almost like articulate the connections, because there's always connections within the past, as you mentioned, and it and how it mixes into the present. But I find that very interesting because you're right. I think that will help more people to understand that, hey, actually, your future or what you're doing, it's maybe something just that moves in a smooth sail, and you're just learning more from yourself and how you can get to that future.
Mm. Yeah, definitely, for sure. You know, there's kind of some things that are very much key to us, and you can realize some of the key things at quite an early age. In
Mm,
some cases, some people have to spend years exploring until they find what's really for them.
yeah,
Like a really great anecdote for that is Eckhart Tolle's story. He spent most of his life in deep anxiety, you know,
yeah,
just in
yeah,
existential despair. And then one day, as he tells it in his transformation story, his life and his purpose started one night when he questioned who he was, woke up the next day in a state of total bliss, and spent the next few years in parks and stuff chilling.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
likewise, you can have someone then like Richard Branson who realizes in his teenagers, man, I love entrepreneurship. I'm not into this
Mm,
school stuff. And he sets off on that course. But as you very much put it as well, regardless of what those key courses or things we want are, or when we find them out,
mm.
it's always that path towards that course that really shapes who we are. And that's where the development takes place for sure.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. And I couldn't agree more on that. And I think that's something that I always love to like touch on. And I'm glad that you're speaking on it because it's so true, you know, like you know, everything that we speak about in this podcast is all about change. And you know, sometimes what you know, one of the main things I try to make sure I address as much as I can is that, you know, there isn't any ideal or perfect routine. You know what I'm trying to say? There's everything is constant on change mode because it's all altered down to the person. And I think from how we've always seen things before, when we see someone like Richard Branson, we're like, oh well, if Richard Branson can do it, I can do it. And even though that statement is true, you can do that, you can become the entrepreneur, obviously. But you may not actually, you know, for what you want to do may not be what Richard Branson is doing, because that may be his purpose, that may be his destiny. It's just that what he kind of has done, he's kind of set like an inspiration or or a way of thinking or a train of thought that can inspire the person who's seeing that to then come up with their own ideas, their own inventions of what they can do. Um, which is kind of how I address things. That's why I've always been like, obsessed with like, you know, like yourself, like personal development and people who are of success, because really and truly they're just kind of just giving you like almost like a blueprint of how you can take, you know, take those trains of thoughts, apply it to yourself, and then find out exactly what you're going for in your life.
Yeah, definitely, man, for sure. It's very much other people who are being successful. They provide us with inspiration and useful models to look at.
Yeah, yeah,
But as you are very clearly indicating, you don't want to identify with those models per se because you're your own person.
yeah,
Like including you're your own person out of 8 billion odd people. That's very true. And another big example that I can see being quite toxic is you see Elon Musk's work habits, for example, and these are oft reported. You know, it was over 80 hours per week normally for him, and there was a point in his life where it was over 100, and you think,
mm,
wow, what a juggernaut, what a beast! Like if I could do that,
yeah,
I'd be successful. And hypothetically, yeah, that's kind of true, but almost no one can do that the way Elon Musk is doing it, never
Exactly.
mind being in the same niche or industry or using the same skill set as him. Another example that's very telling of how important belief is and how important these examples are is Tony Robbins mentioned there was a guy who set the very first record for the 1 minute mile, or
Yeah,
what
yeah,
was
yeah.
it,
I
like
just talk about
4 minute mile,
for my
something like that.
yeah,
I think is that. Before him, nobody had been documented to do it.
yeah,
Within 1 year of this person achieving the 4 minute mile, there were already dozens of people who reached the same achievement.
exactly. Yeah.
So sometimes you set a benchmark and it helps other people to reach it, but maybe from different ways and directions. So, for example, maybe someone ran their 4 minute mile backwards, for example, and all the power to them for that.
No, but exactly that, and that's what it's all about, and that's why I think everything you said about the limitations, touching on that, to being your best self, like essentially your best self, as we said, is yourself. It's not trying to be someone else to feel like you need your best self. Like everyone's setting a benchmark for you to tailor it into your own way of thinking. Um, and just being able to be more connected with yourself, because I think when we have these conversations, I why I like the conversations we're having is because it seems like we're both in terms of like awareness, as you said, of ourselves and where we're going, and that's essentially what we want to do with these podcasts. We want to make sure that people are intact with themselves and learning more. um just to touch on, because we were speaking about books and so forth, what has been one of the books that you've read? I have to ask this question, like, what's been one of the books that you've read and you were like, yeah, okay, cool, this has got me into a state now where I'm like, right, this is what I want to do, you know what I mean?
Yeah, man. So a book that's inspired me to take action. I would say that in my uni years, I was struggling quite a bit with motivation and who am I? And there was this chasm between myself and my being, and the fact that the world is calling out for people to take responsibility and to make a difference.
Yeah.
So I came across 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I'll happily plug him in. I love
Yeah, yeah,
JP.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah, good choice.
and that book, yeah, and that book was really interesting to me because not only does he have lots of great metaphors for explaining personal development. For example,
Yeah,
why do forest fires happen?
yeah.
It's because otherwise the forest keeps growing, keeps building up old wood,
Right,
and
right,
people
right.
build up old wood, so to speak, themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
a fire cleanses it out. You have like a big gush of emotion, for example, and all the dead wood's gone and your forest is cleared again. He comes up with stuff like that, which I loved. But what was really important to me, I think, in hindsight, was he opened a doorway for me to uh, believe in God again,
Mm,
or to also just recognize the importance of religion. And
right.
he mostly did that in a metaphorical way in that book. But for me, that kind of restored a kind of uh, a variety of sort of value sets that I cared about. And I was able to make the connection between myself and duty, and that self improvement is a step by step process. And he talks about it a lot in those terms as well, that you don't have to be perfect on day two or whatever.
Yeah. That's dope, man. And I haven't read the book, but I know it's on my to-do list of books I need to read, because I've got like a list of books that I've literally books underneath my bed and everything that I just read and stuff.
Me too.
Um so yeah, and I love Jordan Peterson's work, man. Everything he does is like super motivational, purely because he speaks in it on, as you said, like a step-by-step process. Focusing on imperfections is the best start, rather than trying to make everything look like everything's going correct, everything's going well. He really touches on that, and that kind of helped me as well. And the bit where you said about like going back into a state of faith, like I'm so for that, because I think for me, my faith is like so strong because I'm more in touch with certain things of like thinking of things outside of myself, that if that makes sense. Like I try not to be like so selfishly in me, like I try to find the bigger cause outside of myself, because there isn't there? Everyone's got that same journey. And I think when we touch into these conversations around personal development, it helps us to start going back into the calling, which I'm only assuming that you kind of got when you read the book.
Yeah, definitely. You offer so many interesting thoughts and insights there. Okay, for sure, it does link you back with that calling, and I think the distinction you make between like the more selfish kind of sense of I and this is about me, and this wider I that lies outside of us, like this I that we often put in a physical body,
Mm,
you know, or in a room. These are my things, and so on and so forth.
mm,
Um, yeah, I think that is very important. And what you will definitely see, there's hardly any controversy here, is that the most unhappy people will be the most selfish people.
yeah.
And what do we mean by selfish? We don't just mean like in terms of like their words and their deeds, like they're inconsiderate of people, they got like a short temper, they don't like sharing resources and money and this kind of thing.
Mm,
But it's also a state of mind and concern that creates that behavior.
yeah.
It's, me, 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 me. And other people aren't necessarily showing up on the radar.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I've
yeah, yeah.
really been there and dealt with that a lot myself. It's taken me quite a knocking to become more selfless, I guess you could say.
Right.
Um, but yeah, a lot of the time, the key problem is that you're not necessarily aware of the damage that you might be doing to other people
Yeah.
through being selfish.
Very true.
And this is one of the biggest barriers to um, kind of realizing this belief and this need, this calling for service, as you
Mm,
mentioned. One of the biggest barriers is that because there's a huge deal of pain and responsibility that comes from saying, "Crap, my words and actions are negatively affecting the world.
mm,
The
mm,
world at large is worse off because of what I'm doing and not necessarily better." It's
mm.
very difficult to admit. But if you can admit that, it's a really great start because it really humbles you. You're in a world of 8 billion people in numerous species and life forms. And you're within the universe as a whole as well, where a whole lifetime is but a fleeting moment. The universe is forever breathing and dancing. It's forever young, and in that sense we're on like a space rock. And like, what do we do with our lives? And the only way to take real meaning on that space rock, if you like, um, is to serve others and to
Mm.
become more aware of yourself. Otherwise you'll be selfish and you won't even know yourself that well either.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, man. Wow, powerful, powerful, powerful. And it's true, you learn so much about yourself when you are, in a place of like, yeah, when you're a place of like being selfless, like not thinking so directly of everything you're doing. And and of course, obviously, there is some form of balance where you have to care for yourself, but essentially, the things that you do for yourself in other words, it's kind of what I follow through is like giving to yourself the things that you need to give to others. You know what I'm trying to say? It's like it's such an easier
Yeah.
resource because during like lockdown and everything like that, everybody was kind of in a very difficult mental state, right? So it required more things like, as you mentioned, meditation. It required more exercise. It required more reading, learning more about ourselves because we needed to be in a place where we could actually be resourceful to people because otherwise everybody was going to be in the same mental state. And that kind of like especially going from seeing things a bit more, it helped me to understand that, to realize that actually just by, as you mentioned, like saying certain words to yourselves or having certain ways of thinking in that moment really makes an impact on another person. And having taken the responsibility, if it means taking a 5-minute break for yourself to give yourself the energies, and so you can be in a place where you can also give the energy to other people, is super super important. um just to ask as well, while we're on this topic, um what do you why do you think that like it's so hard for more people to give themselves that energy that we're speaking of, like giving themselves that thing that they need to do to be more resourceful to people, like, or to tap into their services? I don't know if that's like, if that makes sense in terms of a question, but like, why do you think it's like so difficult for most people to do that?
Yeah, you touch on a big one there, man. It's a great question. Definitely
sorry,
an answerable
sorry,
one.
man. I just
Uh,
questions that come to mind.
That's cool, man. Lay 'em on me. Definitely. So, completely agreed with your words before, too, by the way, about balance. You know, we're all parts working within wholes, and in order to do our part, we have to keep ourselves whole. It's so true. But to answer your question, what's the deepest reason that stops people from answering to their calling, reaching their potential? They've clearly
Mm,
got dreams in their conscious lives, and
mm,
there's still that gap between them and where they are now. It's a really big issue. That's like the golden question. The answer boils down to, as a mechanism, distraction. The root
right.
cause is our relationship between pain and pleasure. So I'll start with the root causes, and then we'll talk about the
Yeah,
mechanism.
yeah.
So the root causes, okay, there are some general things that people don't like in universally. We don't like falling off cliffs. We don't like going hungry. We don't like not belonging with other people.
Yeah.
And then we kind of have more subjective things, like maybe someone's particularly scared of spiders, or someone doesn't feel particularly comfortable with many or interacting with new people, and
Yeah.
so on.
Yeah.
It all comes down to that. Uh, right. We basically set up an equilibrium. Distraction enables this equilibrium for
Mm,
us, right?
okay.
And this all happens within something called a comfort zone.
Yeah.
When you're
Yeah.
living within the comfort zone, you feel like you're in control and life is bearable or better at the present moment. And this is why distraction is so important, because without distraction, you'd have to think and talk about how you're impacting other people. Are you really treating yourself right? Within the silence, will you be able to stop yourself from thinking about the gap between who you are now and the sort of person you want to be in the future?
Yeah. Wow.
Distraction adds humongous noise to this gap, so that you never have to see these big chasms in one's life. So distraction's perfect because you're not in too much pain and you're kind of adding in bits of pleasure. You might be watching Netflix, you might have your hand in a pack of Cheetos or something, and it feels good. It does feel good. Um, and so you're in this equilibrium zone. And Tony Robbins has a really great idea called NAC, neuroassociative conditioning, which is where, in order to make a fundamental shift in your behavior, you need to crank up the pleasure that you associate with the change a lot, like how much pleasure you're anticipating from starting your running routine, hitting the gym, opening a book for 30 minutes every day. You got to really take a lot of pleasure out of the results you're going to get from that. You need to visualize it. You need to feel as if it's already happened, basically. And then on the other hand, you need to really crank up the pain you feel and get from not doing this new habit or thing. Like, what are the consequences of not going to the gym? What are the consequences of buying more Cheeto packs from Tesco? This kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and the more that you extremify the benefits and how they feel and what it feels like to not do the right things, these things that will take you from where you are now to where you want to be in the future. If you can do that, that will give you the inherent motivation.
Mm,
But now this leads me back to the whole mechanism, which is distraction. Distraction needs to be eliminated from your life in order to make that happen. The only way to do that is to quite simply be willing with yourself. And I mean that not in terms of like an action sort of way, like you need to get out there, you need to do more steps and push-ups or whatever. That kind of works, but it doesn't really work that well on its own. What you need is an emotional kind of reset as well. You need to give yourself that psychological safe space I talked about earlier. You need to feel relaxed. You've got to be willing to engage with the fear, and you could tell yourself something along the lines of, I know this will make me feel uncomfortable, exposing myself to all this awareness and all these problems in my life and opportunities for that matter. And I care about myself enough to do that. And it all starts with that simple consideration. You have to make yourself emotionally willing. Then you will tap into the resources of your willpower to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So the root cause is our relationship with pain and pleasure in the balance of our lives as it is. And then the mechanism that keeps that equilibrium, that gets people stuck, is distraction.
powerful, 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 powerful. Yeah, I love that. I love that. I was trying to literally go through a quotation of what I heard in the song by Nas, the rapper. He was saying, I quote, it might not be the exact words, but he was saying about like um this the I have to actually get the word of it because it's gonna bother me if I don't say it correct. But it was basically touching around comfort zone. So he basically says the end of your comfort zone is the start of your life. And I just think it's just
Mm,
so true. Like, when you're not stuck in a state of comfort, everything starts happening, right? Like all the things that you didn't even think that you possibly could have done. Um, is available to you on the other end of discomfort, you know what I'm trying to say? And it's like I
yeah,
really connect with that, and I'm glad that you touched on that as well, especially around distraction, because um we can literally be in a place where we remain still, as you mentioned, just trying to stay in a state of calmness, in which kind of goes into a place of discipline as well, because when we actually connect more with ourselves in that moment where our minds are racing and we might feel distracted to, as you said, like eat some Cheetos, or you know what I mean, just run, do these, these things that might have been passed down to us by ancestors, etc., etc., because we think that food is scarce, and etc., etc. Um, but when we really go into that discomfort, we go into a different place of ourselves, and that helps us to realize that actually the things that we want to connect with are actually there. They're actually available, and the things that are actually available is completely limitless as well, of what we can actually reach. And I'm glad you touched on that, because um I think in the book, I really forgot the name of the title, but it's by Near Isle, and he basically says like there's kind of what you're saying is like you have like distraction, you have traction, right? So it's like the difference, the differences between the two, and to get into a state of where you're not. He basically says that you can't really know when you can't really call something a distraction if you don't know what you're being distracted by. It's kind of his way of thinking. And it's
yeah,
kind of clever when you see it like that, because it's true, because we don't realize that we're being distracted until we actually call it a distraction. And I like the way you said that, what you said, because it's true, because you can go back into a place where you're like, right, I'm being distracted, let me just take a moment. You know what I mean? And in that moment, then you can go
yeah,
back to where you need to go to, and that could be the traction. So yeah, it was
yeah,
really really important that you touched on that. Um Cool. So just the last thing is gonna, because I know we're coming to the
sure.
end. What is kind of, just because we spoke about motivation, right? So um what is one little simple little thing that someone can do to be more motivated, just based around what we said?
Yeah, the one simple thing they can do is take anywhere between half an hour to an hour to fantasize
Yeah.
about the ideal life that you want to make for yourself. Write down the details of how it's going to feel, how it's going to look, and just quite simply what you want for yourself. And then start telling yourself that I deserve this and I'm going to get it. If I had to give one such tip,
Nah, that's amazing, Carl. And I'm really glad that we did this call. I reckon everything you said is
good
super
man.
resourceful, insightful. Just the last thing as well, actually, where can our listeners go to know more about everything you're doing? Because I reckon everything you said has been very, very helpful. And I think some people would love to know more about what you do.
Yeah, man, for sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Just type in the name Kyle Mapley, and I'll probably show up. And you can also search up the website as well, where I offer many of the services to do with psychological transformation, called potentialinaction.co.uk. So you can find out more there too.
Dope, dope, dope. Well, cool. Well, I just want to say thank you again, Carl, for being on the show. It's been great to have you on. Of course, this probably
Thanks,
won't
man. You
be
too.
probably be one of many podcasts, but yeah, thank you again for being on the show, and also thank you for our listeners for tuning in. This is the episode of 3 Minutes of Motivation, and more episodes are going to be coming out very very soon. So take care, guys. Cheers.